Ever heard of Gerhard Ackerman? Well, if you haven't, please listen closely. Gerhard Ackerman is a man facing more than 730 charges, which include rape, possession of child pornography, human trafficking, and sexual assault. His trial started this week, and he was the co-accused of senior advocate and acting judge Paul Kennedy, who died before he could answer to these allegations. Let's speak to Women, Men Against Child Abuse Senior Director Miranda Jordan-Friedmann. Miranda, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. It looks like this was a well-organized sex ring, at least looking at what the indictment says. Let's start with your reaction when you first heard the story.
Absolutely. I mean, it's one of those stories that comes out and you just cannot actually believe the players that are involved in this. And when one looks at the senior people that are involved, and one looks at Advocate Paul Kennedy, I mean, it is frightening. And and we know that there are many high-profile people involved, and we hope at some stage when we hear from the victims themselves that we will know who actually, or maybe, you know, who some of these are. But one of the young boys who was sexually assaulted, he actually came forward and broke this whole ring open. Otherwise, I don't think we would have had any idea of actually what was happening.
And I'm going to get to, these high-profile individuals and what this means for this case in just a moment. But, a number of people have just said this is sick. This is sick individuals who do something like this to children. And one then wonders what would even go through the mind of a person that is committing such horrific acts.
I mean, we're looking at very serious exploitation of children here. I mean, the latest charge that was added today was one of attempted murder, because the boys who were transported either by bus or by rail from another province up to Gauteng. In fact, in Johannesburg, in and around Johannesburg is where all in two houses is where this was all taking place. But that one of the boys were also handed, hand-delivered to the late Advocate Paul Kennedy, who was known to Ackerman to be HIV positive, both to have sexual acts performed on them and for them to be raped. And that is why this charge was also added today. And it is just horrific. Yesterday we couldn't get through all the charges. We went through to 700 charges, today to 740 charges. What these boys, was done to them and what they were expected to do to these men is absolutely horrific. Also, I want to say, when we heard today from Colonel Clark, who was interviewed, we were actually up to number 6 of the victims. And unfortunately, we also have power issues there at the High Court, and we'll be back tomorrow to hear. But basically, they, a lot of them came from disadvantaged backgrounds and were already had been, had been bullied or had been exploited before. So it really was taking advantage of children who desperately needed help. And then to sort of make a deal by bringing and delivering this child. And then Mr. Ackerman would take a cut of the payment that he got either from the late Paul Kennedy or other men in the group. So he was really benefiting from the exploitation of these young boys. It is heartbreaking, it's heart-wrenching, and it's,
And one can't even begin to think of the horror and the trauma that this has caused to, these men. Let's talk about, him in the dock. He's there listening to all of this, can't even get through some of the charges on day one, and he cannot plead. But how is his demeanor in court?
On the first day, he was sort of quite, in fact, even towards the afternoon, he was quite sort of composed. We thought we actually heard him sort of smirking to one or two of some of the charges, but Yeah, he's also changed a bit of his whole. He arrived. First of all, he wears his mask all the time, but we saw him walking down, and he sort of had taken his mask off. He also wore a Muslim skull cap. Never worn this before. The judge is Muslim, as far as we can see, or we imagine. But he suddenly was walking down the street. We happened to be passing him, leaving all. We had to all leave court. And there he was, sort of, had changed his whole persona. I mean, we were quite shocked, to be honest with you.
Sure.
But I think that he also, I just want to say, has opted. He said he's not guilty to every single charge, but he has opted to actually not testify. So, I think everything we will hear will be based on what the young, vulnerable witnesses are going to testify. It has been asked that all of it will be in camera. Some of them are older teens now. They were younger at the time. But the abuse has had a massive impact. There has been talk of wanting to commit suicide. I'm not going to say much more, but they have been highly traumatized by what has happened to them. It has been, I'm sure, life-altering for all of them, and it's heart-wrenching to hear, I must tell you.
It's even harder to even read some of what has happened. You cannot but cry as you're reading it. In about 10 seconds, Miranda, we're out of time. I suppose then, as you mentioned it, the high-profile nature that this case is in, and allegations that there may be high-profile people involved here as well, that also shows the sophistication of some of these rings that may also be in operation in South Africa, unbeknown to the authorities.
I mean, absolutely. Who knew when this happened, was broken a couple of months ago, that in fact this was happening in your northern and northeastern suburbs around the corner from your studio, or from my office or from my home. I mean, it is heart-wrenching to know that, but I think this expose will open a lot more and a lot more vigilance and
As you sit in court, let's then continue the conversations throughout the course of the day to see what happens and what in fact then becomes of this particular case. Thank you so much for your time, Miranda. Do appreciate it. That was Women and Men Against Child Abuse Senior Director Miranda Jordan-Friedmann.